Hi, everybody. Welcome to episode 17 of Lean Whiskey. I'm Mark Graban, joined as almost always by Jamie Flinchbaugh. And you can see we've got another special guest today. It's our first episode with three people. Jamie will tell you about that.
Yeah, so how's it going, Mark?
We're good.
Good. Yeah, so we've occasionally done these. You have a guest host, I have a guest host, just to mix it up and have some fun. Um, and so I was planning on heading to Indianapolis and in March, late March actually, and Jim Huntzinger and I were planning to meet at Lean Frontiers and do an episode. Um, and we actually got some of David Meyer's Glens Creek whiskey and had it ready, and then things happened.
Yeah.
So I didn't go to India in March. We thought about just figuring out when we could make the trip, and then thought, hey, why don't we just do a 3-person lean whiskey? So that all got canceled. But we have a guest, Jim Huntsinger of Lean Frontiers. How's it going, Jim?
Good, good. Thank you both for letting me be a part of this. Looking forward to it. So, as you mentioned, looking forward to it at the end of March. But yeah, things do happen. So I won't go through everything today. So I'll save it for when you guys do get a chance to come here and visit. We'll have some of the whiskey for actually when we're together as well.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We've both known Jim for a long time, so it's good that we didn't have to fight over who got to co-host with you, Jim.
that's right. Yeah, I've known Jim. This will be an interesting test. We didn't actually talk about this, but I've known Jim since at least the very first Lean Accounting Summit
That's right.
in Detroit that I came to speak at, and I can still remember in Dearborn, and still remember some of the speakers. I know I met Jean Cunningham, who recently retired there. Always loved her. So I know that's how far you and I go back. So how far back do you and Mark go?
Oh gosh, Mark, if I need your help on this, I can't remember if it was at a conference or doing a podcast. We've done several podcasts over the years.
I
But,
think, yeah, I mean, it's probably at least 10 years.
yeah, that's what I was
I can
going to
Google.
guesstimate.
We probably did a podcast or two before we ever crossed paths
Yeah,
at an event. But when was your first Lean Accounting Summit again?
2005. Yeah, as Jamie saying that 15 years ago.
Yeah,
Time goes by quick.
it does. Yeah, that was quite a long time ago. And yeah, I've been out to your offices and we've done some things. I helped your very first Lean HR Summit and the very first Lean Product Development Summit and others over the years. So
Yeah,
um,
you've participated, keynoted. Mark, you've I think at least a couple times. I think you've keynoted as well.
Yeah. Thank you for those invitations. Well, I've attended a Lean Coaching Summit in Austin. I was at a Lean Management slash, or is it Lean Accounting slash Lean HR combo conference, I think.
What might have been it's lean accounting, lean management, and now lean HR.
Yeah.
HR came in a little bit later. For
But
people development, we like to say.
yep.
I did look up the first podcast we did together, Jim, was January 2007.
Oh
Wow.
wow! So
Look at that.
a little
That
more
was
than
on-
10 years.
That was on training within industry, and then we did one in November of that year about the Lean Accounting Summit,
Okay.
and a couple
Okay.
more since.
Yeah, as we've talked, yeah, time goes by quick.
Yeah,
Well, and to the idea of, as Mark and I started this whole thing of, talking shop over a drink, right? Jim, when you for a long time had these thought leader dinners, which I think started out as just let's meet at the bar and talk shop,
Yeah,
and it turned into a slightly more formal affair, if you will, with a dinner and sometimes even off site, and people brought spouses. But it started with just, hey, those who are coming to speak, let's meet at the bar and talk shop during the conference.
yeah, because a lot of people, some people knew each other. I mean, personally met before. A lot of people knew each other but hadn't met before. Some people didn't know each other, so it was a way just to let people meet and get to know each other a little better.
Yeah, no, I thought those were great. And, you as a curator of speakers and content, and then Mark with his prolific podcasting and blogging, kind of in many ways get to meet, I'll say a broader spectrum of the lean community than my practices have allowed. So I always enjoyed those. I always looked for, who do I get to go have a deep conversation with at one of those dinners or bar events? So.
Yeah, they evolved over time. Like you said, they originally just kind of meet and get together. They evolved. We sometimes would do something a little more formal, but when we even got away from that, people still wanted to get together just to be able to talk with each other, chat, catch up on what's going on, have some deeper conversations, and so forth. So it's ebbed and flowed and evolved over time.
Awesome. Well, that's kind of what we do here, both the ebb and flow and the talk shop over drinks. Except on this program, you don't get to drink whatever you want. It's lean whiskey.
I had a guest host who is a gin drinker, so that was actually a gin episode. There's an exception to every rule. One
detour, yes. One I was probably not prepared to make myself. So, we've all been. I know I haven't traveled in quite a long time, and we'll talk more about this in your world, Jim. But you used to travel a lot. Mark and I used to travel probably more.
Yeah, probably more. Yes.
And I haven't traveled since early March. But Mark, you've had a few opportunities to travel since.
I don't know if I'd call it opportunity.
Fair. Poor choice of words.
I haven't traveled for work since I flew home from a client on March 11th. But, with the coast to coast relocation that we talked about last time, I was in LA. I'm back in Texas this week before going back to LA again. But, I've had to fly a couple of times due to the relocation. Occasionally by choice, and every time I do it, I wonder, why did I make that choice? But I tell you, I chose the time I flew from LA to Orlando and back. I chose Delta Airlines. I'm normally frequent flyer American Airlines, and had an episode in late May. It was actually after we did episode 16, where I had a guy next to me basically refused to wear his mask the entire flight. And so maybe, there's a question there about, if something in a workplace, if we want to extend the topic, is required and leadership isn't stepping in when there's a very obvious violation of a standard, what do you do? But I do want to give praise to Delta, because at least compared to American and United, they're only filling the planes 60%. Science is still out whether that's really meaningful or not. But the thing I wanted to talk about and bring up for a little bit of chat was the thing I was impressed about with the flight attendant on Delta. It was fairly consistent without being overly scripted, but the flight attendant made an announcement, not just that flight attendant, that wearing masks were a policy or required. She said something to the effect of explaining why. She said, I wear the mask to protect you. I ask you to wear the mask to protect me. And I thought that was really powerful.
Yeah.
Of Jim, I'll throw it to you for a second. Training within industry emphasizes explaining why, right?
Yeah, to get people involved and engaged and committed, explain the reason why, just not giving out some dictate or just this is the way it is. But there's a reason behind it, and a valid reason as best as at that point in time.
Yeah, and Patrick, I know one of our favorite TWI experts did a hand washing YouTube video on demonstrating TWI using hand washing, and his daughter, who was a very willing victim in that process. But there's in addition to the why, there's an awful lot in how you deliver the message. And I think that's key, not just about masks, right? But just in general, you deliver a tough message. And using the mask example, I know there's a store near here that said, you don't have to wear a mask, but if you choose not to wear a mask, we ask you to strip down all your clothing and come in naked. And of course, No, they don't mean that, but it's a fun way to say, please do this. But the why becomes a big deal, right? So how you ask, the relationship between the person making the request and the person you're asking. And TWI makes a big deal, not just of the why, but also of the relationship and how the person relates to the person.
Yeah, which are the two strong components of making that successful. So they understand, and then as you said, to build that relationship, because that's well, it need be for that case, Mark. Like you said, the airline ideally wants to build a relationship with their passengers because they want them to not only have a pleasant time on that trip, but remember them for the next time they come. Is yeah, things went pretty well. They were pretty reasonable on with these circumstances. So sure, I don't mind flying them.
The one other thing that comes to mind, a colleague of mine from Kinexus flew, I think, to go visit some family, and he was telling us the other day that the person next to him had the mask on, but it was only covering their mouth. And I think there's an opportunity to explain a key point when it's called a face covering. The key point is to cover both your nose and mouth. Maybe we could call it a nose and mouth covering, because it's not covering your whole face. That's a mouthful, I guess, pun intended. But
it is, but it's right. If you look at the data on how much you can expel when speaking, when yelling, when coughing, or when sneezing, right? I mean, boy, sneezing is the ultimate, right? It's a mini explosion, and again, those whys become a big deal, right? If you want to do it with a purpose, you got to know why. And we so often ask for compliance without people understanding why they're doing something, and that's why I think that's one of the reasons TWI has been so successful at training folks is that component where I respect you enough to explain why I'm asking you to do something.
Yeah.
It's important, and it makes me still think. Going back to your case, Mark, talking about on the aircraft is not an understanding of why of just protecting the people near you, but on an airplane you're in a big can, so you kind of have not only the proximity, but you have the containment factors in there as well too. So it even becomes even a little more important.
Yeah, and I think that's probably an additional factor, right? So if people are there and they can't, I always look at, can I remove myself from the situation that I don't like? Like, if people want to do their own thing, that's fine, but can I remove myself? Once you're in a plane, you can't, right? You're locked and loaded, so to speak, strapped in for the long haul. So
I didn't bring a parachute.
Nope, no parachutes, and it's a problem if you try that. So I don't know if we need a why for this, but we call it lean whiskey for a reason. We enjoy our whiskey. I guess that's the only why we need. So I think for the first time, I'm almost certain for the first time, we're actually having the same drink. And it just so happens that, when Jim and I were preparing for meeting up in person to do actually what would have been the first in-person lean whiskey, we got a couple bottles of our friend David Meyer's Glens Creek distillery whiskey. And so Jim still has that. And it just so happens that Mark and I have the same bottles. So we thought, why not give that a shot?
Well, we're going to sip it, but
we're not going to do shots. That's fair. Yeah, I thought we were past doing the puns.
Okay. And David was nice enough to send these to us and actually signed it to us as well. So
yeah, he's big on the signing, which is great. And you always get the bottle. So now I have the newer bottle.
Oh,
yeah. So this is actually basically like an Eagle Rare bottle. And David doesn't have one bottle that he puts a bunch of different spirits in. So so what we're starting with today, we're actually going to do two pours. Another first. This is a show of first, man. But But we're going to do two pours, two different Glens Creek drinks. But we're going to start with the Cuervito Vivo. So all three of us are going to get a drink of this, which basically and Glens Creek is relatively, I'll say, so small relative to its host, right? So it sits on the site of the old Crow distillery that shut down in the 80s. And their entire distillery is basically in the original machine shop, because the distillery itself is by no means safe to run a business out of. But this is basically the same mash bill of the original Old Crow. And when I say the original, so most people listening to this probably aren't old enough, including myself, to remember the old Crow. But long ago, Old Crow was a top shelf, and I think it deteriorated with a couple of stages reading the history over time, but it definitely deteriorated when it got bought by Jim Beam and became bottom shelf whiskey. So this was Jim's effort at recreating, to a degree, Old Crow distillery, or good bourbon.
Yeah, and maybe now that we're experimenting with the three-way call, well, that's a dated term, but we'll maybe get David to join us. I don't know how his Wi-Fi is at the distillery.
Not good.
Not good.
Yeah, I don't remember it being
He has to
good.
step outside to use his phone to come through.
But yeah, I mean, it's a good story of trying to recreate an old recipe. It's kind of cool that David has done that.
Well, and I love, when you talk about standards, right? You can't just necessarily follow a recipe. You've also got to know what good looks like on the other end. And so they've used the last supervisor to manage the distillery.
Oh, really?
To help, and basically his nose, as they say on the website, his nose has been some of the guide to help recreate this Cuervito Vivo, which, for those that haven't done the translation, translates to live crow, which is, it's born again, if you will, the original Old Crow, in a great tasting to bourbon. So yeah. I'm curious. So Mark, for starters, we'll start with you, and then maybe Jim can weigh in. What do you think of Cuervito Vivo?
I'm not a good tasting notes guy. I had a little small gathering of a couple of friends here to do some whiskey tasting last night. One of those friends is a level 2 wine sommelier.
Wow.
So he's the one who can always pull out. I always want him to taste stuff because he can pull out words to describe what he's smelling. I mean, this one's still relatively new to me, which I know is not a helpful description for the viewer or the listener. It's lighter in color compared to the OCD Premium, the OCD number 5 that I'm more familiar with. But yeah, I mean, it's a relatively light bourbon with a little bit of spice to it, for lack of better words.
Yeah, what do you think, Jim?
Yeah, I guess I was disciplined enough to keep these closed and sealed until today.
Yes, you were. Good for you.
But I did open one up to give it a try before he came on earlier today. And as I tried it, I kind of, as Mark said, kind of got the good strong whiskey taste as it went in my mouth. But with that, I felt as I swallowed, it was a smooth flow down my throat. So good strong, I guess, bourbon taste, but then a good flow down as I swallowed. So I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it. Actually, this is actually 5 years ago as David was starting up. He brought a couple little test bottles of a couple different bourbons he had going. So I still got the bottles on my desk of a couple little sample bottles as well. So I guess this would be my third one I've tried of his whiskeys.
Awesome. Yeah, I've now OCD number 5 is probably if I had to end up with a single daily drinking bourbon, that would probably be it. It's a little pricey compared to some of the bottles you can buy for an everyday drinker, but it is so good. And this is lighter. I don't think it has as much richness, but it's also really easy drinking.
Yeah.
And it's not just strong on the front, weak on the finish, or vice versa. It's kind of good all the way through. And I'm like you, Mark, I'm not really great at tasting notes, but I enjoy it. It has sort of just enough complexity, and quality for sure that I really enjoy a drink of this. And I'm very unusually on the rocks tonight just because of the temperatures being a bit high. But so we'll share. I know we've talked about David's distillery before, so we won't belabor that point. We'll come back to that topic. But the closest thing to actual lean whiskey that we can find for sure, based on its founder.
I don't know if you guys have either one of you had the opportunity to visit him there?
Yep. Yeah, we both have. Yep.
Oh gosh, I'm behind then. It's on my bucket list.
Well, you're closer. You're here.
Yeah,
you're a drive away. No, I've been there and got the long tour and even just hung out while he gave a tour to some people who stopped in and sampled, I don't know, every different variety he has, or at least close to it. Signed a barrel, walked around the grounds for a little while. It's a really cool place to visit. The ruins, if you will, of the old Crow Distillery are just a sight to see. They really are.
We'll definitely get there, and I told him several times that keep the door open. I will make it there.
Yeah.
Yeah, he always keeps the door open. That's for sure. He'll be there. So let's talk some lean stuff. As we already kind of covered, Jim, you were, we kind of met you through your summits, and you and I met at the very first lean accounting summit. I think you knew I was one of the, I don't want to call it a pioneer because I'm by no means an expert, but definitely one of the first people to start writing about it. And talking about it. But you guys are kind of in the conference business. I know it's broader than that, but it's not a big shock to everybody. But conferences are one of the most hard hit industries in the country today. So you guys have been sort of adjusting and pivoting pretty hard. So what have you had to deal with as you've faced the pandemic?
Yeah, and one thing I guess we like to say is obviously we do conference and things related around it. We like to always say, like, we kind of build communities within lean community, and certainly from the conference standpoint, that's important because to us it isn't just about the conference to have a conference, although certainly content is very critical and important, but it's really about getting the people together. I mean, that's a huge part of thing and something very important to us, that people get together, thought leaders, practitioners, academics, and just sharing and learning from each other. So as we went through this process, as this happened, we tried to approach it very cautiously. And two main things. One is, like I said, just trying to get people together is so important to us. We wanted to make sure if we couldn't do it, that we didn't do it for the appropriate reasons. So we really, on a weekly, if not really daily basis, just watched how things were going, how they were going to progress, because things certainly were changing quickly. And so we held off as long as we felt we could before we'd have to make a decision to switch virtually. And we did that. We were doing it really a summit at a time. As the next one came up, we'd watch that and we got to point, okay, well, I need to convert that, and same thing. So it was really just a matter of watching that to make sure we were watching what was going on, to make sure we're getting feedback from presenters and our attendees, to make sure we made the right decision at the right time. and also that in a time that we felt we can transition, adequately and do a good job with it. So all that's been important to us, just the transition part and how we approached it as well.
Yeah, and I know that you've been very, especially early on, very active in putting webinars out there, supporting the community, which
Yes.
is a non-revenue source. You've got a team, you've got to employ, but you went pretty hard, pretty early on, just kind of providing content for people.
Yeah.
And I got to participate in one of those webinars.
And that was something too, is just not only to, again, because the content is certainly important because we can be subject matter specific, but again, part of it was just how can we, if we can't physically get together, how can we keep people engaged and together as best we can with the circumstances? So though, again, those two same type of things were kind of driving us as we did the webinars through that process.
Awesome. So what we thought we'd do tonight is talk about some of the summits that you've switched to virtual, and I kind of selected a couple of keynotes out of those summits, and we can talk a little bit about the content that they plan to present. I know we don't have their presentation, and certainly don't steal their thunder, but we know what their topics are, or at least what they're known for. So a little preview at the same time, as we tend to do, just talk shop and wax on poetically about our various opinions. So I grabbed a couple of these summits. The one you have coming up quite soon, later this month, is the Lean Coaching Summit, which is, I assume, grown quite well. You had July 27th, 4 keynotes, unique breakouts, etc. So I kind of grabbed a keynote that I found interesting. Deandra Wardell, I think I got her last name right, Wardell. But Deandra, I thought was pretty cool. So why don't you tell us more about her and her keynote?
Yeah, I'll kind of tell a story about her when I first met her, and which rolls into what she's going to be talking about in her keynote. Is Deandra came, and I want to say it's maybe the Kata Summit, and I just happened to meet her and get talking to her, and just kind of asked her how she was, using Kata, and just trying to learn a little bit about her. But she told me a story about, and she does. So she's in corporate, kind of the people development, HR aspect is kind of her background and where she's at now. But her actual story she told me was not about what she's doing corporately or in business, but she said she's part of these. She's involved in these women's groups that they have, and one of their objectives is several years back was to get together and put together at the beginning of the year, what are their objectives for the next year? What do they want to accomplish? How do they want to grow? What do they, want to do? So they got together, talked about it. They put together plans and all that. And then they got back together later in the year. And lo and behold, Deandra was the only one that accomplished pretty much all of her objectives. And everybody's like, we didn't really do so well. What did you do? So basically what she did is she used the kata methodology in practice, setting a challenge and goals and the plan, do, check, act cycles and all that to meet her goals, whatever challenges, how to get over it. And she went through that process. Well, they were so impressed by the fact, not just she got, 1 or 2 of them done, but got them all done. They go, well, you got to teach us that. So essentially that's what she did. So she got them back together for the next year, taught them the process, taught them, the improvement kata, and then I shouldn't say let them go. They would meet periodically, and she would help coach them using the coaching kata to get through it, to do that. And she said by the end of the year, the majority of the ladies, with the majority of their goals, many of them, all of them, got them accomplished. So like, this is fantastic. So she's been doing that now for several years and expanded that out. She does it with a group, I think at least one group at her church. I think she has, again, several ladies groups she does it with as well. So she just told me that story. I just thought, it's a great story. it's a great story utilizing things we do in, business and industry outside of that from a personal standpoint, the personal success she's been able to do with it, but how she's shared that and helped these other ladies get that personal success as well. So she's going to, she'll talk about other things as well. And she has other good stories, but I was thoroughly impressed by that story.
That's a really cool story. Yeah. And that, prove it through results, right? And that's kind of what she did first. And then just, ran from there. That's super cool.
Yeah. And on top of it, she's a sweetheart of a lady. So she's a great gal as well. So that's all the great attributes that she's going to give a great talk. And also, too, I guess one other thing about her, she's actually local here in the Indianapolis area as well, too. So she's a neighbor as well.
Oh, cool.
It's funny that, that you're singing Deandra's praises. I talked to her. We did a Zoom call, just a private one-on-one the other day, because I had been impressed by things she was posting on LinkedIn, and really, really enjoyed having the chance to meet her. And one thing that we're going to do, I'd sort of offered up, because she collaborates sometimes with Karen Ross and a group that, kind of informally or formally calls themselves, Women of Lean Network. They have a LinkedIn group. And through the Lean Enterprise Institute website, there's kind of overlap group Lean Women Sensei. But what I offered to Deandra was a version of what's sometimes called a blog takeover, or, there's a social media takeover. I'm calling it a blog handover because she's not taking anything. But in the spirit of giving exposure to different voices and different people, basically my blog is hers for a week to publish what she and some of her colleagues want to write. So I'm glad you're collaborating with Deandra as well, Jim.
Yeah, and we enjoy her. We've done a number of things with her. And one thing we are going to do, we're actually going to have her come by here by our studio and do some recording with her. Just it's got, obviously, like many other things, it's got delayed for the time being, but we're looking forward to a good time, hopefully here this year yet, that we can get her in here and do some, let her talk about some of these things that she's doing, again, from the personal level standpoint, because she's certainly somebody that's, again, not only using it in her work and her career, but using it outside of that effectively.
Well, I've seen her LinkedIn posts as well, and she brings a ton of energy, which is just fun to see. I have to acknowledge her glasses. Her glasses game is really solid. As somebody who enjoys switching up their glasses, really impressed. But there hasn't been a lot of people who talk about applying this in nonprofits, in church groups, and things like that. And I think that's interesting. Obviously, nonprofits, I think, have a different lean journey than most organizations, and partly it's they very rarely are on a lean journey, but they might use some lean stuff, for lack of a better word, to help their cause. And I think that's an interesting challenge, because the idea is you can be a leader in any field and use lean. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean you have to have a lean journey, a lean budget, a lean resource, or any of that. It's just about how you approach the work you have in front of you.
How do you approach it? How do you improve it? I mean, the only nonprofit experience I've had was I had an opportunity to do some pro bono work with Catholic Charities in Fort Worth. So my wife and I had been involved, and then was having a conversation and got introduced to somebody who had taken an early retirement out of telecommunications and was basically their director of quality improvement. And so we talked, and they had me come in and do some Kaizen training, and they were doing, Kaizen style process improvement in a couple of different areas of Catholic Charities. Because when you start engaging people and asking them, do you have ideas about how to make your work less frustrating and be able to provide more value to their clients, that's powerful. And the other thing was interesting, and I'm long overdue. I should dig up the document and blog about it. they had a really impressive document that actually connected a number of Bible verses and elements. I'm not Catholic, but elements of Catholic faith that were sort of their argument for why they had an obligation to practice continuous improvement within that Catholic Charities division. So I thought that was a really powerful connection that they made for their own purpose and inspiration.
Yeah, I think purpose is, one of the things that makes nonprofits, I don't want to say unique, just different, is purpose is much more clear often.
Yeah.
Right, to that point. But the how is much more varied, right? And it's not just metric driven, right? Because it is much more purpose driven. I spent the last 3 years on the board of a nonprofit, and I brought a lot of lean to the table without ever really using the word lean. We talked about scalability. We simplified things and took out waste. We built standards for how certain things would be done. A lot of them, actually, quite a few. And ultimately, we more than doubled the reserve protection of the nonprofit, quadrupled the staff, quadrupled the profits that were able to be reinvested. And so there was a lot that happened, but it was just around bringing a lean lens to the problems at hand. And I think people sometimes overestimate the benefit of having a lean journey versus simply bringing a lean lens or a lean thought process to the problem at hand.
I think one thing you brought up is important, and certainly more driven with the nonprofits is that purpose, because usually most of them are created out of some purpose they had. So they create an organization to try to meet that purpose. And I think a lot of times organizations for profit could, and some will try to do that, try to focus a little more on purpose, purpose of why they're there, try to almost like a potion, deploy that purpose down through the organization. If you see some organizations that are not nonprofit, but otherwise they're a little more successful, a lot of times they have a better disbursement of what is the purpose of why we're here. One that pops in my head is Menlo Innovation. They certainly, people there, I mean, it's not a real large organization, but still people there really get the purpose of why they're there.
Right. Yeah, purpose becomes pretty powerful if you can connect the work to the purpose. So
yes.
So carrying forward, you then have what's become a week, and not just a summit, a single summit, but the lean accounting and management / HR and people kind of multi-track summit, which recently, more recently, switched to being virtual, and I believe, is that in September, Jim?
Yeah, that's in September. I actually don't have the dates in front of me at the moment. I should have, but in September. We've traditionally had it in September. We've had it for a few years in October, but in September. And originally that was the original Lean Accounting Summit. We started 15 years ago when you were there.
Yep.
And we just had, over the years, had so many other people that had management aspects of what their responsibility was, that eventually we brought in the lean management part of it as well. And then we had a separate Lean HR Summit, but eventually that developed into, it's more than just HR. It's really overall about people development, and really that should be more of HR's role in an organization. And there's just a lot of tie-in. We actually, just by circumstance, we had those in 1 week separate summits a few years ago in Savannah when the hurricane hit. So we had to postpone by about a month the event, and just by the opening the venue had, we had to do it all at the same time. So we did, because that's the opening we had, and the feedback we got from it, from the accounting management people, was, well, I really enjoyed the fact I could go to some of the people development or HR sessions and meet those people and learn that. And we got the very same feedback from the HR people, is I love that I was able to meet these people involved in in accounting or in more management roles and get to listen to those. So we went, let's just keep it together. That seemed to work. We'll keep it together. And then that's work going forward. So that's, as we kind of coined the name Leadership Week for it, as we rolled into that circumstance.
Yeah, and I think the last one of those I attended, I remember leading a lean coffee session on lean in the board of directors.
I remember that.
And Ori and I ended up turning that into an article, I think, for Target magazine, if I remember correctly. Yep. But it was a little disappointing in the sense that I think he and I were the only ones in the room that had served on board of directors. But it was still an interesting discussion, in addition to whatever talk I had given in that particular year. But I selected for this one an interesting one. You call it a mini keynote, but it's delivered by you. I don't know if you call it a mini keynote because it's smaller or just because you didn't want to be self-promoting and overstate yourself, because I know you're quite humble about your role in the lean community. But your topic was advanced lean, which quite compelling in how it sounds. So what do you intend to talk about with advanced lean?
Yeah. The way it came about was for quite a few years, people would attend and we'd get feedback on, particularly people that might have a little more maturity, I guess, in their lean journeys on, we'd like to have some more topics on some advanced topics, involved into advanced lean. What's advanced lean? And I get back from the summit and I, think about it and I go, advanced lean. I don't know if I really understood what they meant by that. And the more I thought about it and get the feedback and talk to some people when they bring that up, it made me think back to my own experience, just going back 30 years ago, as we would develop stuff, in a sense, what would we do to develop what we would still call today advanced lean? And as I thought it through, what I realized is all we would use the fundamentals. The fundamentals in going to problems, into thinking them through, and doing, like I say, and a lot of this is in reflection because we didn't articulate it this way 30 years ago, but we just did constant little plan, do, check, act cycles. We'd go through the cycle, figure something out, run the experiment, step back and, okay, how'd it go? Did it blow up in our face? What did we learn? Again, not as formal as we do today, but essentially that's what we were doing. And we just keep driving to that till we'd come to some countermeasure solution or something we thought was adequate for our purpose. So that early on in accounting, that was things in some supply chain and internal changes with our organization. We had a lot of internal, in a way, supply activities that went on, and we just really used the fundamentals. And we could always come to something we felt was a reasonable place to be, quote unquote, from a lean perspective, as best we could. But in reflection, I really thought about is if you just get really well-versed and well-experienced with the basics of understanding a problem, looking at it, collaboration, a lot of it was collaboration with, at that time, my colleagues, we felt we could resolve any problem. And it wasn't like it was permanently resolved either, but you'd be able to make good steps forward. And a lot of times, by the time you got to that step forward, you would realize that the horizon I couldn't see a couple weeks ago, we can see now. So it already, you'd be in the mode of, okay, we know what the next number of experiments should be. So that's what I wanted to bring into it, is really trying to explain is what's so important is just to get good at the fundamentals and learning to apply those diligently and in collaboration with your colleagues. And I truly believe you can, and again, when I say solve, I don't mean solve because it's always ongoing, but you can come up with solutions and countermeasures that'll take you leaps and bounds ahead. So that's really what it's about. It's pretty short. I just want to keep it short, kind of to the point of, from my perspective and experience, that was advanced lean.
That's pretty interesting. I think there's a lot of fields of expertise, if you will, that you start with some fundamentals, you get pretty good at them. You keep looking for more. You expand your palette, if you will, and then at some point you kind of go back to the core. And I think lean is definitely one of those where there's the more advanced people actually use fewer tools and fewer methods than some of the folks in the middle of their journey.
Yeah. A regular, I guess, result of that process when we go through it, because sometimes depending on what we were working on, it might be something we spend several weeks on. It could be something we spent several months on. But by the time we get to a place where we felt this is an adequate countermeasure for this point in time, we'd sit there and reflect back and we'd go, we felt at that point, this really should have took us a couple hours to figure out. Why did we spend several weeks or several months figuring it out? But it's just those learning cycles you go through that you get back there. And really that's that residual knowledge base that you develop in doing that. So the next time around you do something, you could usually go through it at a quicker pace. Like say you increase the magnitude, increase the velocity through that experience. But that would always be the case. How come we didn't think about this just a few days ago? It seems so obvious now.
I think it's interesting when they're kind of related topics. Advanced lean. Someone will write an article. What's beyond lean?
Yeah.
Lean 4.0, whatever that means. Or I got invited, and I'm happy to have the discussion. I got invited participate in an online virtual panel about talking about the future of continuous improvement. And well, sometimes the future involves going back to basics.
Yes.
Yeah, I think, we hear about Industry 4.0 and a whole bunch of other things. And there's still some core things that matter. You can dazzle people with complexity. But, when it comes down to it, what matters about the process or the problem that you're trying to deal with? And the problems change and the solutions change, but the way you think about them doesn't really. It's thinking about COVID, thinking about any process, any problem we have today fundamentally isn't different than thinking about a problem we had 10 years ago. It's a matter of what's the most effective way to explore that particular challenge.
Yeah, with that, just I think both of you guys know I like a lot of industrial history and I've done a lot of study in that. But looking back to learn lessons on, I guess we'll say lean lessons, is when a lot of studying I did even prior to Toyota, the early Ford Motor Company, particularly Highland Park plant, is I'd say essentially that was really, essentially that's the model that Toyota tried to emulate. But some of the things they did early on were very much lean activities. Now, certainly they were more primitive and we have more refined now, but that's not because they were necessarily more primitive. It's just they haven't had the last 100 years now of us going through learning that we've taken from that to do that. But when I look back at a lot of things they did, decision making they did, a lot of those elements and attributes are in the way they did some of the decision making and development work.
Yeah, no, it's amazing how often I come back to cause and effect. that fundamental. I've been doing a project with Industry Week magazine called Factory Talk, and we're actually interviewing and spotlighting, if you will, factory managers, operations managers, because they don't often get to go to the Lean Summit that you deliver, Jim, because they're so busy running a factory. So we're highlighting them through some video interviews, and the last one I did was we haven't released any of these yet. It's just a forthcoming project. But I asked him what's the greatest impact tool or method in your operation. He said 5 whys. Just getting people into the discipline of understanding root cause has been one of the most impactful things. And that's, I remember I used to have conversations around if you took one lean tool with you to a desert island, what would it be? And my answer would always be 5 whys. I don't know if that's the right answer, but it's just a fundamental discipline of understanding cause and effect. Mm-hmm. And if you can get that right, my argument was you can reinvent the rest of the stuff.
Yeah.
Because they're all just solutions based on understanding cause and effect.
Yeah, I mean, you could restate that same fundamental as saying, well, okay, the one tool I would take is PDSA or A3 problem solving, because yeah, I agree with that thought experiment. If you're starting with problems and needs and you're looking at systems, you would end up creating tools like 5S or Kanban if you were looking at situations in your organization in a systematic way. Five
Yep.
Whys is powerful. I wrote a blog post a few years ago, in the lean startup community, like Eric Ries and his work, and he's done a lot to popularize the 5 Whys. And I hear people say things like, "Well, all you have to do is ask why 5 times." Like, well, that's after you've properly formed a good problem statement and you've understood the current state. And like there is a little bit more that you need to do, but asking why 5 times is better than reacting to symptoms. That's for sure.
Yeah. No, and I think my judgment is always, if somebody has a template that has 5 Whys on it, I know that they're not really understanding the core of that, which is understanding cause and effect, right? Because it's almost never 5, right? It's
Right.
4, 7, or 3, or
Depending on how you frame the problem.
yeah.
Some I've found before my past sometimes a 500 Whys in order to properly dig into something.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So before we go on to the next one, I know Mark is already ready for his second pour, and I guess I am too.
Already kind of jumped into that.
So we're gonna jump into our second pour, which is Cafe Au Lait. So as for the viewers, we'll show that for the camera. And it was a new bottle for me, so I had finished the last one. I resisted opening it because I knew I probably wouldn't last very long. Smaller bottle, as you can tell from the size. Cafe Au Lait is another one of David Meyer's products. And this is fundamentally their most popular thing, OCD number 5. But they add a heavily toasted barley malt. And, first of all, I've tasted, or actually, I have tasted, as well as smelled the barley malt before it goes into the brew, and that was kind of special opportunity to do that. But boy, it really changes the product for sure. And so I am not drinking this on the rocks. This is a different color. This is a different taste. This is a different price point. And this is a different level of goodness when it comes to bourbon.
This is my favorite of David's of the Glens Creek bourbons. I think you already mentioned earlier. It's the exact same mash bill as the OCD number 5, but the different malt. So the same amount of malt, but a more heavily toasted malt. And last night when I had some friends over, I very intentionally set up a side-by-side tasting of OCD number 5 Premium and Cafe Au Lait. The OCD number 5 is darker in color, which maybe seems counterintuitive if you've got a darker roasted malt, but it may have also been, I'm pretty sure the OCD number 5 was in the barrel longer, which is probably contributing to the color. But yeah, that's one thing I think is interesting about whiskeys is your impression of it by seeing how dark it is doesn't line up always with how it's going to taste.
Oh yeah. I think color is a huge fake out when it comes to taste in a lot of ways. And it's nice to enjoy a good color on your whiskey, but don't let that convince you whether it's good or not.
I will say this. So when I got a hold of David asking him to send this to us, and when I told him it was Jamie, you and I were going to get together, that's why I have this, because he said, "Oh, well, if Jamie's coming, I have to send a bottle of this," because he said this was Jamie's favorite. So again, I haven't tried it till just now. I just opened it today, kept it closed. But again, this is waiting for both of you. It's both your favorites, waiting for you guys whenever you come to visit.
Yeah.
It covered.
It is. Yeah, it's definitely my favorite. Like I said, I think OCD would be my everyday drinker. But I, partly because of the bottle size, and partly just to savor it, I don't drink it often. just for, measurements are easy and anybody can look that up, but this is, this is how much you get of each one. But it is a special taste. It is different. I don't think there's anything else I have on my shelf that tastes quite like this.
Yeah.
And I really do save this. I hadn't opened this bottle yet. I was partly reluctant to, because I like saving it. I can't I won't say can't wait, because obviously I do save it, but really want to make sure I'm in a mood to sip and enjoy and taste and not just drink when I'm opening up Cafe Au Lait.
Yeah, this is one I open up for friends who I know appreciate whiskey, and they want to try something unique. This is definitely one I'll say. Here, I bet you've. Well, I can say quite certainly you've never had this one before. Let me share it with you. And
right.
That's one thing I enjoy about whiskey. And in this day and age, we can't do quite as much of this. We had a small gathering. We sat outside and tried to be reasonable about it, but it's good connecting via Zoom. It's especially precious these days to connect with friends in person, share some whiskey, and catch up.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, this is not something I would give to a first-time bourbon drinker, that's for sure. But for someone who's tried a bunch of things and is looking for something special, this is definitely worth giving a shot. Very different. Very rich. Not, it's not just heat, right? It's not just, heavy on alcohol, heavy on wood. It's the, you can tell this is the grain that makes this special.
Mm-hmm.
It has a unique aroma with it as well.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It they talk about, I think, coffee tastes on their website, and you definitely get some of that for sure. It's not sweeter though. It's not, it's not a sweeter. I talk about coffee and chocolate, but it's not a sweeter bourbon. But it's rich in so many ways.
I mean, yeah. I mean, it's a high corn. I remember from the notes I'd put together for last night, it's something like 86% corn, which is pretty high.
Yeah.
But it's not super sweet like some really high percentage corn whiskeys.
Right. No, yeah, it's not just soda disguised as liquor. It's bourbon, but absolutely crafted, and
definitely good, unique Kentucky bourbon.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And I know, I know some of this is this will be kind of interesting to see what you guys have in your bottles, but I know this is mostly about the shape of the bottle, but in most of them, the bottle number and the batch number is on the side, but these are right on the front, right? So this is barrel number 4. So this is only the 4th barrel of this that he's done.
Mine's number 4 also.
Mine's barrel 2. I had a bottle from barrel 1, and that is Dearly Departed. But I did get to compare. It's the beauty of it's a single barrel whiskey. There's bound to be variation, and I would argue that variation is not always bad.
Right.
That's part of the uniqueness of the single barrel.
So, the reason we all know David Meyer is that he is a lean guy, and he's absolutely applying lean to his whiskey. He's former Toyota as a group manager, if I remember correctly,
mm-hmm.
And lean consultant, co-author of the Toyota Way Field book. And I would argue, just to be blunt, the author of the Toyota Way Field book, even though Jeff Liker's name is on it as well. So he's a lean guy.
And the book Toyota Talent.
And the book Toyota Talent.
That exposes people to TWI, because he discusses TWI and Toyota Talent.
Yeah, absolutely, right. So he knows the fundamentals. To your point about your talk, he knows the fundamentals. He's coached them. He's applied them at Toyota. He's taught them as a consultant, and he's applying them at his distillery. And so I don't know if this is the first time since he started his distillery. He's come back to teach and talk about lean and as a speaker. But it's got to be one of the few opportunities because he's really focused on his distillery. But yeah, he was going to come and speak at Barcelona at your TWI Europe Summit. But he is planning on doing that in next year in the U.S. as well as in Europe. And so, why don't you tell us, I don't know how many bottles he'll bring with him, if any, but what is he going to talk about at a TWI Summit? Was a bourbon guy.
Yeah, I'm telling him bring me some of the experimental bottles again.
Yeah.
No, yeah, we were gonna have David at Barcelona, but as you said, it's got canceled. We are gonna do this fall with him a master class for the Europeans, virtual master class. We're gonna do with him for the Europeans this summer. More details coming on that. We're working on it right now. But as you said, we're gonna have him speak at the TWI Summit this next March, and then also have him back to Europe next year in June, our usual time as well, just so people can have him seen face to face. But what he's going to talk about is, and actually he did speak at TWI 5 years ago, but he had just started with the distillery, still really just trying to get it kind of going. So he talked about other subjects. So this will be the first time he's going to actually talk about things around the distillery. So what he's going to talk about, this is something him and I have talked on and off on for a number of years, but it's around on how do you develop standard work where there really isn't standard work. So certainly him going through a company startup, as well as with the ramp up, and from what discussions I've had with him with the whiskey processing. I mean, certainly there's standard things you do with the whiskey processing, but he said on the daily stuff, you're not always doing the same thing because there's multiple things going on at once, but there's certainly standard patterns of behavior to do, even though you don't do them always in the same sequence, and there's going to be modifications. So certainly has that aspect from the distillery and his startup and running the production with that. And even he's going to reach back to some things from even his Toyota experience where there are attributes of those types of patterns, but really around that. How do you develop standards or practice standards in a non-standard environment? And him and I, like I said, talked about that a number of years ago. There's another fellow, Oscar Roche. If you guys know him and I had that discussion because he had asked me years ago around process development, and I said, well, he said he wanted me to describe it to him, and I said, well, I can and I can't because it's that type of thing. There's very much things. We'll say process we would absolutely do, but it was unique every time we went through the process. And it relates back, even when I was talking about that advanced lean thing, it's really about applying these practices. And this is what David's going to go through and talk about, where you have these practices, but it always is same standard pattern at maybe a more higher level, but maybe some more at the micro levels. And you just got to step into the circumstance, back to the Plan, Do, Check, Act, and evaluate the circumstance, and then make your judgment on that, and then apply maybe a standard in that kind of non-standard way. That's more simpler in what it is, but that's what he's going to talk about. And I'm looking forward to it because there's a lot of people that with some good lean experience, but aren't always experienced in, I guess, that aspect and need in their organizations.
Well, what's interesting is, most people think about standard work as it applies to, for lack of a better word, controlling other people and their work.
Yeah.
And Glenn's Creek Distillery, most of the work is done by two people, David and one other, and they do a lot of the crafting, if you will, of the brews. So, when you understand standard work as something beyond just controlling other people and how they do their work versus how you do your work, it becomes quite different. And I think that his, going from a thousands of people factory to, of course, consulting to now what's fundamentally a two-person factory, and still having the same fundamental beliefs and fundamental practices, I think is a great sort of trajectory to learn the benefit of those keys.
Yeah. And David, I think, is case in point with what he's doing. He's being an improvement scientist, if you will, as it's sometimes called in healthcare. He is not putting out barrels, yet alone bottles, at a takt time of 60 seconds. And for anyone who would say, what we do, that's not cars. Whiskey is not cars, and David is adapting his past experiences and showing what's transferable. Whether it comes to building and improving upon his own stills, or improving upon the whiskey over time and trying new things and seeing what works. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, one thing it takes feedback to is if in Mike Rother's Toyota Kata book, first one, a particular diagram he had in there. He has now different variations of it, but in the original book, it's kind of this oval. On one end was your current condition, the other end was a target condition. And what I always liked that he labeled the middle larger oval as unclear territory.
Yeah.
And you make your way through that. And to me, that really, because it illustrated things I'd gone through in my past, but really illustrates this, is you don't know, kind of know where you want to get to. You don't know exactly how to get there. But each of those little iterative cycles, there's certainly standard behavioral patterns built into those that allow you to traverse that unclear territory and get successfully to where you want to get to. And again, another benefit of that is all that learning that you bring along with you as you go through that process.
Yeah, and it's, from my actual in-person visit to David's distillery, he certainly got to share a lot of his understanding of cause and effect, right? What he's learned through his trajectory and what some of his experiments are. And so that's why I think, well, each brand or sub-brand or bottle has its own intention. I think it's really interesting, the idea of comparing barrel to barrel, because he's not only is he experimenting, but he's then coming out of that with new standards for how things are done, and essentially for what is basically intended to be a craft, he's turned it into a science. And I don't mean a mathematical formula science, but in terms of understanding what it takes to make a good barrel. And I think good, the very best craftsmen, well, let me say, very good craftsmen understand that, right? They understand there's a set of conditions, there's a science behind it, whether they use it in scientific terms or not. The very best learn it in a way that they can teach it. And that's why I think his connection to TWI is so interesting.
Yes.
For sure.
I've worked with companies that have, from that sort of, craftsman versus science standpoint, I've always argued that crafting is often science we don't understand yet. Now, true art might be just art, right? But there's no question that something like bourbon is. There's chemical reactions, right? There's taste buds, there's proteins, there's enzyme, there's all sorts of stuff that's there that's science that we just don't understand everything that it takes to make something great and consistent. So I even worked with one client that had a process that it considered a craft. It had done it for 100 years, and it had 100 variables, 100 knobs, 100 dials, right? All these things that somebody could control. And it took years and years to learn how to manage it. And they just decided, we're going to understand what really matters. Of those 100 knobs that we can turn, which ones matter? And they pursued a pathway of of science, of understanding cause and effect. And in the end, they sort of locked out 80% of the variables, figured out which 20 mattered, developed a baseline standard, but then still allowed, the craftsmen to kind of adjust based on what they knew was working in that particular time. And it's had a measurable impact on outcomes, both in terms of quality and output, of going beyond the basics to truly understand your craft, right? Because I think that's the pursuit, right? The understanding of your work. That's why we call it a team of scientists. Is, do you understand your work and why it produces the results that it does?
Yeah, that's a really good point about the craftsman. He's really somebody that has absorbed in all those data points in a sense and understands the patterns, the different patterns that when they observe certain things, they kind of know what patterns are going to come out of that. Or if they make certain adjustments, essentially based on data that they've absorbed, they'll know how to make those adjustments accordingly to meet whatever their objective is.
Yeah, and I've done, I don't talk about this a lot, but I've done a lot of angel investing over the last 15 years probably. And, I have some rules. I have some rules that I've determined based on trying to understand what matters. And every time I violate my own rules, which I sometimes do, I pay for it. And every time I follow them and then sort of track the outcome of it, I realized those rules were pretty good. And again, it's an instinctive, it's somewhat instinctive process of making an investment decision. But the pursuit of getting better at is understanding cause and effect, right? Understanding what are the variables that really matter.
Yeah.
Well, let's. I think we've talked about 3 different summits that you have, Jim. Probably a good time to wrap up here. And as tradition on, we have a lot of traditions on lean whiskey, other than the fact that whiskey's involved. But we always like to end with a little bit of lightheartedness and fun. So I thought an interesting question was. A lot of us have been doing a lot more working from home or working differently, at least over the past several months. I know for me, I've technically worked from home for 20 years. It's just been 1 or 2 days a month since I'm usually at a Marriott or a Delta Sky Club or a client. So kind of curious, what's the best improvement that you've made or the best experience you've had while working from home from your home office? So Mark, why don't you kick us off with that one?
Yeah. So, I'm setting up in the office in new home in California and got MacBook Pro, a docking station, a monitor, speakers, handful of things. And the condo has a built-in glass desk. So I'm sitting at the desk and I'm looking down and like all the power cords and the cables. Like I've never been so inspired to say, I need to neaten that up. So a combination of one of these flexible tube channel systems. So now there's one white tube snaking up under the desk instead of all these random cords. And then the cables, the USB for the microphone and everything that's behind the monitor. I took a bunch of zip ties and got those all tied up and bundled up. And so they're hidden behind the monitor. And because I'm using this home office desk a lot more than I would in normal times, I'm like, I want to hide that clutter. So that was my improvement. That mattered to me. Is my business going to perform quantitatively better as a result? No, but I think there's something to be said. Joe Schwartz, local to Jim in Indianapolis, would emphasize in his health system. Sometimes you let people do a Kaizen because they want to do a Kaizen. And there's nothing wrong with that.
That's a good phrase. That's sometimes following people's passions, it won't always produce a performance result, but, 3 out of 4 times it will. So, why not?
And the risk of saying no, that's not aligned to true north, is that they say, okay, fine, I'm done improving. It's not unreasonable human behavior to get turned off when you say, I've got an idea, I'm excited about it, I'll make my life a little bit better, and you're told no. That's why they avoid saying no.
And to your own desk, right? I mean, our work environment does impact our performance. It does. You may not be able to measure it, how much that has helped, but our work environment affects your performance. So make it work for you.
Now, so that other one was that was all very inexpensive Kaizen. I am sort of tempted to maybe buy a new MacBook Pro, but that would completely throw off the cabling because it's different connectors and different. So I'm like, well, maybe I'm locked into this MacBook Pro for another 6 months or something at least. It's good. That's good for the bottom line of my business.
That is good for the bottom line. Yeah, we don't always need to spend the capital just to make our work better. What about you, Jim?
Yeah, when you kind of mentioned that, you'd asked that. I thought, oh yikes, because during the shutdown, I kept coming in. I didn't work from home any more than I did. But our team here worked from home, so nobody was here, and I'm not that far away. Easy 20-minute drive on the interstate. So I just kept coming in. I guess maybe my story with it was, I thought, well, good, I'm going to be able to go in. I was in here by myself for 3.5 months. I'll be by myself. It'll help me be able to get some research and reading and writing done because I'll be in here myself. And lo and behold, I did some of that, but really not a whole lot more than I usually do, just because other things in the business came up and our transitions and all that. So, Mike, from some standpoint, it was nice to be in here. Somewhat undisturbed on my own, which is different, obviously, than the norm. I didn't get quite the things done that I was intending I thought I would get done. But that's okay. It was things associated with the business I needed to do. So, things still got done.
Yeah. Good. Well, for me, for those that are on video, they're watching this on YouTube, you might notice my wine cellar is right there in my office, but that's always been there. So that's not a new thing. But for those that have meetings with me, you'll notice different settings. I enjoy standing while working, and having a stand-up desk. And for many people that do that, they have an adjustable desk. But unfortunately, or fortunately, I guess my sit-down desk is my grandfather's desk, and it's old and beat up, but it's my grandfather's desk, and so I like to use it. And my stand-up desk is my great-grandfather's toolbox converted into a stand-up desk.
Nice.
And so I can't get rid of those. Those are too important. But it was a big deal to move back and forth, right? So I kind of fully facilitized with the webcams and the laptops and everything else I need. So I could kind of move back and forth between sit down and stand up. And there's an awful lot of days where I have continuous meetings with clients, and I'll do one meeting from sit down, which is where I am now, and one meeting from stand up, and one meeting to sit down, and bounce back and forth. And it's made a huge difference. And then, the other thing I'll add is that our home's construction contractor was, quite frankly, not the best. And the doors I had in my office that lead to the outside were very, very poor. They weren't square. Water would come in and rain, and worms would come in, and bugs and all sorts of things. And so I just had those replaced, which includes the ability to open up to the outdoor with screens. And it's a small thing to have a door, but boy, it's changed since I spend so much time in my office, it's changed things quite a bit. So I've been truly blessed to have the office that I have. I've kind of taken it for granted because I'm only here once in a while, but being here every day for weeks on end, really, really feel glad to have the setup that I do. I'm very fortunate in that matter.
So it sounds like you now have the options without the varmints and weather.
Yeah, we had storms all day today, so opening the door would involve rain coming in my office again, but at least I could control it this time as opposed to other days. Well, I guess that brings us to the end of our episode.
At the end of my whiskey.
Oh boy, that's worse. There's always opportunity to pour again. I'm sure your bottle's not done.
No, correct. Yes. I'm not at zero inventory.
No. That's just in time with whiskey is way too close to call.
Not the way to go.
No, not the way to go. It's always worse than just in time, and I may have overdone that lately, but I'm not going to complain about it at all.
Yeah. Well, gentlemen, I certainly thank you very much for allowing me to be a part of this. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Thanks for being part of it, Jim. And I want to thank everybody, as always, for listening or watching. If this is your first time tuning in, let's say you're a friend of Jim and you learned about the podcast from him. This is episode 17 of a series. You can find all of those at leanwhiskey.com, regardless of how you like to spell whiskey, K-E-Y or K-Y at the end. It goes to the same place. You can also go to Jamie's website if you prefer.
Yeah, so you can also go to jflinch.com/leanwhiskey. And you can find Jim. What's your website, Jim? How do they find you?
Leanfrontiers.com. And once you get this released, we'll let everybody know about it as well.
Well, thanks for doing that, and welcome to friends of Lean Frontiers who may have tuned in and may have stuck around to the end. So if you would like to subscribe, you can do so. You can find us through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, pretty much any place that you normally might find and subscribe to podcasts.
And please do rate us. Please review us. Give us feedback. Subscribe to us. You're not only helping us in terms of making this better, but you're helping others find the podcast, and we really do enjoy sharing with others. So that rate, review, and subscribe really does help. So please help us out in that way.
Got one other splash in my glass to end on.
Excellent. So I guess that brings us to the end, and cheers.
Virtual cheers.